1. I'm 29 years old and work as a security guard doing nights in the UK. The site I usually do my duty at is in the northwest of England, but I will not give the name of the site or specific area to keep my job secure. So I was in the army at the time, when one of my closest friends landed this job first. He was always a very hardcore skeptic, but started to tell me that he was experiencing things that were weird and freaking him out sometimes. After the army, I went into a couple of random jobs whilst I got my momentum back in regular life, and also got myself an SIA license. Eventually, my pal got shipped off to another site for the same customer, and I jumped at the opportunity to work in his place. My pal Jason kindly drove me to the site for my induction to meet the guard on duty that night. The guard on duty was a very down-to-earth man in his 50s, and after showing me the ropes, the whole 5 minutes, he asked me what I think about poltergeists. I told him briefly about some of the experiences I've had throughout my life, and his eyes lit up, which sparked a casual friendship ever since. Basically, he told me about 2 guards leaving in the past due to strange things happening at this site, and that every guard has experienced at least one thing there. He is a lot deeper into this stuff than I am, but it adds to his harmless charm, and we have shared many deep conversations about the subject. Saturday night, during the Christmas holidays in 2018, I locked myself in for the first time and ready to spend the next 12 hours alone, enjoying my own company and getting paid for it. Gaming laptop straight out, albeit on whisper volume of course, and frequent heads up in case of intruders or van drivers coming to collect their personal vehicles. This place is quite creepy looking, as it is out in the sticks somewhat and surrounded by farmland. But I am very used to cutting about in the dark in places similar from time to time in the army, so it was just whatever to me. For the first few shifts, I just heard the odd strange noise which, quite frankly, could have been anything from temperature expansion, contraction to wildlife. However, on the night prior to the staff returning to work for 2019, I had one of the most profound paranormal experiences of my life which genuinely scared me. It was a 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. hourly patrol. I stepped off at about 3:30, and as I put one foot out of the guardroom door, a tiny stone whizzed around the guardroom, bouncing off the metal lockers, desk, etc. At head and torso height, I am 6 feet tall. This didn't make any sense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way. The first of my patrol involved walking around the back of a 2-story, medium-sized office building, where there are lots of stone pebbles to walk on before coming out from the back of the offices, and onto a relatively large car park about 2/3 the size of a football pitch. As soon as I stepped foot on the tarmac, a pebble landed next to me, and I thought nothing of it. I could have easily kicked one up a bit with my steel-toe boots and not felt it, whatever. I got halfway across this car park, and another landed just in front of me as it came from behind me. This is where I started to feel things weren't quite right, as the pebbles were way back by this point, and I would have felt it this time due to the added force of it. I continued, and at the end of the car park were a row of shipping containers on the left and a huge biffus skip on the right. The patrol route takes me walking in between these for about 30 meters, and this is by far the creepiest part of the site as it's so dark and dingy. This is where things began to get intense. I was still walking towards this area, and roughly 20 meters away, when another pebble hit the biffus skip loudly, about 5 or 6 feet high. In other words, I would have had to get a bit of a run-up and put effort into booting a pebble hard enough to get it high enough, and to match the force it hit with. This really startled me, and I stood still and confused for about 30 seconds, looking all around myself. But there was nobody, and I was equipped with a 400-lumen heavy-duty torch, so I could see for quite a distance. Nobody whatsoever. I reluctantly carried on in my duty down the alley past the skip that had just been hit and the shipping containers to my left. I had gotten about 10 meters past the first shipment container, when it sounded as if somebody ran up to it with a sledgehammer and gave it a massive whack. My backside almost swallowed my pants whole, and it took every ounce of courage to immediately run back onto the car park, shine my torch in all directions. If this was a human, due to the layout of the site, they could not have gotten away in time, unless it could contest Usain Bolt, and even that would be a stretch considering it probably took me 2 seconds to sprint there, if that. The guard who gave me the induction is that interested in this stuff that he told me to call him if anything like this happens, no matter the hour. So I continued to the center of the car park to get a full field of view on the site, but of course nobody. Suddenly I just heard bang, 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 coming from all directions but confined to within the site, shortly followed by tiny stones constantly whizzing past my shins, with a low trajectory similar to how one would throw skimming stones across a body of water. The thing is about these stones whizzing past me is that the direction they were coming from was a huge 3-story high warehouse with no windows or doors from my point of view, so these tiny stones were being thrown at me from an unseen force for 100% certainty, as all that was there was 3 stories of brick wall. Never once did any of them hit me, just whizzed by my legs left and right. Behind this warehouse is a river that gets quite choppy in winter, but even so, the trajectory dictated that the stones were definitely being thrown from in front of me, and not over the warehouses, which would be a next to impossible feat anyway. I rang the other guard, and he could immediately hear the racket going on. He told me to go by the river and call out to it. Now, despite having a few experiences sparsely throughout my life, I have never been interested in engaging with whatever the phenomena is, but I decided to humor him anyway, all the while crapping my pants. I called out to it, can't remember what I said, and everything immediately stopped and went silent. Nothing further happened that night, and the other guard said he's never known anybody get terrorized quite that badly by it. Once the staff arrived, I spoke to one of the blokes managing the site, and he said he would check the CCTV footage for any messers. Interestingly, the next shift a couple days later, the cleaner, who used to be around for a couple hours after the shift leave, called me into the office block to see a document printed out on an email. This was to my security firm about the events, but stated that they could not see anybody or any stones on camera, but could see me doing an intense investigation and being violently startled a few times. Since then, I have had very sparse experiences such as doors slamming, a filled mop bucket moving 3 feet from the wall in front of my eyes, plates smashing in the canteen. Very annoying, as security often gets the blame for this, understandably. Cutlery having a quick jangle in the canteen drawer, a loud sound of what can only be described as heavy cardboard boxes being dragged along the dusty warehouse floor, and footsteps coming from the room above. A few months into the job, I got another very close friend a job there, who was also in the army prior, and also a massive skeptic. Until now. He literally laughed at myself and Jason whilst we gave him his induction, when we mentioned the strange stuff. Jason to this day references his cocky laugh, as his attitude soon got set straight. So a few nights into my other friend Scott working there, I get woken up by a phone call at about 1:30 a.m., and it is Scott with a trembly voice, saying that somebody just sprinted up the stairs and ran through the short corridor, and is currently stood outside the guardroom door. I said, "Well, you're a security guard. Do your job and see who it is." Of course, nobody was there and nobody could be there due to coded doors. I haven't experienced anything paranormal there for a long time now. It seems to have weeks, months of calm, followed by short bursts of activity. I've also since branched out and done all of the sites my company contracts with, and never had an experience elsewhere besides one place, to which I have video evidence of, but I'm reluctant to share, and even then I need permission from the guard who works that particular site. I've even worked at a number of derelict, creepy old mills with nothing strange going on. 2. I've always been fascinated by the supernatural and paranormal, ever since I was a child, and my obsession began after reading the Darren Shan books. Anyway, that's beside the point. So when I went to uni, I started getting into a lot of occult reading. I went to uni in central London, and there's a bookstore called Watkins. Anyway, I would spend my weekends there pursuing the different occult books and artifices that they sold. Often, they were very expensive, but I got a student loan and had some money spare to play with. Eventually, after many months, having read a number of occult books, I decided to get a Ouija board. Yes, I'm a fool. So a couple weeks later, me and my girlfriend are chilling in my uni room. had a little to drink, but not much. I decided to bring out the Ouija board and see what she thinks. Needless to say, she was initially skeptical and apprehensive, which made sense, since she has a family history of extreme proportions with the paranormal. But that's not my story to tell. Eventually, we nut up and decide to try it. At first, nothing really happens. We ask silly questions, and I try to scare her a couple times, as one does. So eventually we start to relax more, and it turns into more of a game than a true experience trying to contact the other side. In our minds, at least. I decide in my ignorance to call out to an entity while we're using it, Azazel, a name I'd read about in some of the occult books aforementioned. My girlfriend looks at me strangely. At this point, I'm kinda just losing it, calling out to this entity. Thinking back, I'm not really sure what compelled me. I shit you not, my curtains start to close really slowly by themselves, and my wardrobe starts opening and closing. To say we both shat ourselves would be an understatement. We ran out of there. We get a coffee and talk about it, but even at that point, we're semi-laughing about it. Probably read too many books or something. Became desensitized, I don't know. I walk my girl to her dorm and go back to mine to sleep. That night I have the most intense dream of my life, and let me tell you, it was a nightmare. I don't really feel like going into details right now, as I get severe anxiety when I visualize it too much. But basically, it was of hell, torture, and suffering. Years later, I never touched anything to do with the occult since, other than to protect myself against contact from entities that wished to do me harm. To say that the dream I experienced that night scared me would be putting it nicely. Anyway, that's my story with the paranormal. Take it as a lesson, a warning. However you wish to internalize it is up to you. I just felt I needed to express it. 3. Many years ago in basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, our unit was doing the land navigation course. This course is designed to make sure soldiers learn how to read a map, and you are tasked to find locations. Once at the location, there is a code you need to write down, thus proving you actually found it, and make your way back. There is a day course and a night course, both out in the middle of the woods of Kentucky. We set up at the day course site and completed it without incident. However, our drill sergeants, being masters of efficiency and laziness, decided that instead of moving everyone, including themselves, to the location of the Nightland Nav course, would just make us walk and navigate there on our own. This added about 2 miles in each direction to our course. They did allow us to start our course early, so we could at least get to the starting point before dark. We were paired up into teams of 2, so me and my battle buddy planned out our route. Our location was middle of nowhere in the woods, and the other was a far distance away, but along a dirt road. Knowing that if we moved quickly, we'd still have the sunset light to work with, we went to the middle of nowhere location first, as it would be hardest to find, whereas the one along a road next to a cemetery we figured would be easy to locate, even without any light. We found the first location without too much difficulty, but the sun was quickly setting and it was becoming twilight, as we made our way back out to the road to the second location. By the time we made it to the cemetery, it was pitch black out. The sun had already set. We also only had one flashlight because, in the infinite wisdom only a basic training soldier can have, my battle buddy didn't think to bring his flashlight for a night navigation course. We ended up circling around this entire Civil War era cemetery before we finally found the location marker. We wrote down the code we needed and began a very long walk back to the navigation site. Luckily, it was a straight shot down roads, so we didn't need to worry about getting lost or trying to get through thick woods at night. However, only about a mile down the road, I began to get this feeling that something was following us. I looked behind us, but saw nothing. The further we walked, the stronger the feeling got, as if it was slowly getting closer and closer to us. I asked my battle buddy if he felt anything, but he just gave me this confused look, and began to get very annoyed as I'd turn around and point the only flashlight behind us, rather than keeping it ahead of us. The feeling of dread kept getting stronger, and I repeated the Lord's Prayer in my head several times, to try and calm myself or make this thing go away. As the feeling of dread reached a fevered peak, it suddenly dissipated. I didn't feel anything behind us anymore. For a split second, I was so relieved until it dawned on me that the reason I couldn't feel it behind us anymore was because it was walking right alongside of us. It dawned on me that either this is all in my head or my battle buddy is really not sensitive to the paranormal. As the now 3 of us walked for about another mile till we reached our campsite and the land nav course. Once we reached the camp, the feeling I had went away and I just relaxed and managed to catch some Z's since I never saw anything, and it was just a feeling I would have chalked up to being just a paranoid thought in my head. But the very next day, I went to talk to a good friend of mine in our unit about it. Before I could tell him my story, though, he began telling me about a series of weird things that started happening in the camp that night. And I'll never forget when he said, "Yeah, it all started to happen just after you got back." 4. During the 3rd lockdown in the UK, January 2021 to March 2021, I was up in Derbyshire with family. I'm a student, so was in my last year of 6th form from then. To do online school on Zoom, my parents suggested I go to the vacant cottage that my parents usually use as an Airbnb so that I wouldn't be disturbed by the noisiness of the house, with both parents working over Zoom and my younger sibling doing online school. This cottage was built by my great-grandfather, so my family inherited it. It's been renovated and looks relatively modern on the inside, but it is in a quiet little village, and although not isolated, it can sometimes feel a little bit lonely. I would often sleep over there to finish my work and just relax rather than getting my parents to have to drive out to take me home. And every night I did so, I would lock up at about 6:30 p.m. However, one night it must have just slipped my mind to lock up after finishing my homework, and I just went upstairs to take a bath. I came downstairs, watched some TV, when I realized I couldn't remember if I had locked up or not. So I went to the front door and noticed that the keys weren't on the table next to it. For context, I would always leave my keys on that table, without fail. I then checked to see if the door was locked, and of course it wasn't. The door swung out to the darkness outside. I closed it and started to retrace my steps. Not yet too concerned about its whereabouts, just thinking I'd had it in my hands and put it somewhere stupid. So I've opened almost every drawer in this cottage, looked in the fridge, through the bins, in case I'd accidentally thrown it out or something, checked all my pockets, my bag, etc., almost every place, including absurd places just to be sure. It wasn't anywhere. I decided to go back downstairs and start all over again for the 3rd time, starting from the front door, when I saw the keys there, on the table, placed perfectly straight and neat and pointing toward me. I had checked that table twice and hadn't seen it before then, yet there it was, perfectly in plain sight, and right where I would usually leave it. I was immediately on edge. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was so unnerving to see it reappear in the most tauntingly obvious place possible. My first reaction was to grab a large kitchen knife and call my dad to come over, as I thought that maybe someone had crept into the cottage whilst I was bathing and was taunting me, playing mind games. He rushed over, checked the whole house, but there was no one in the cottage except for me and him. He laughed at me for not looking properly, and no amount of assurance would convince him that it had just appeared. Once I knew that it wasn't an actual knife-wielding maniac, I felt fine again. But when I came home, my mum told me that my uncle had a paranormal experience in there too. My uncle works as a builder, plumber, electrician, and he did some renovations in the attic. He has never lied in his life. In fact, he tells the hard truth 100% of the time, even if it would be better to not say anything at all. He told my mum that when he was in that attic in the dark, he heard an old woman's voice in a low tone ask, "Hello." Apparently, he bolted out of there. She didn't really tell me much else. There's another story too. When we were younger, we temporarily lived in the cottage when our house experienced some issues with the water pipes. One night, our babysitter experienced a sort of sleep paralysis, where she said she saw a shadowy figure of a woman come into her room and begin to choke her. When she woke up, she had her own hands around her neck and was coughing and spluttering. I don't know how much sleep paralysis plays into the paranormal, so I don't know whether to include it here. But maybe it could be connected. Anyway, would love to hear people's thoughts on these events that have taken place in the cottage. As far as I know, no one who has used Airbnb has complained of any issues. 5. Ever since I was a child, I've always drawn in spirits or others. I usually didn't pay my gifts any mind when I was younger, but nowadays I'm trying to get back into the tune of things. I have many scary tales to tell, but this one will be about an apartment I lived in for a few years when I was around 9. Background information that's needed. The apartments I lived in were brand new, as in my family was the first to live in them, as they were just finished being built by my province's government. In Canada, the government used schools known as residential and day schools to forcefully assimilate the indigenous population. The majority of these schools murdered and abused many of the children, who would have attended as young as 3 years old until they were 18. The old residential school sat in the next field over, and was turned into an office building. It still had all the original fixtures and bathroom stalls before it was inevitably torn down. My aunt worked in that building, and I visited her there often. In the bathroom stalls was carved "Mary Got's a Baby." This will be key later. The new apartment buildings were unfortunately built on top of unmarked graves of the children who attended the local residential school, which was one of the worst in Canada for abuse. When it begun, the first day in our new home was awesome. It was just my mother, my sister, and me. Our local government built our apartments for single-parent housing. It was everything we wanted, especially for my sister and I, as we now didn't have to share a room. All 3 of us settled in my room's bed to sleep. We laid there, talking about how happy we were. At that point in time, we'd only lived in 2-bedroom basement suites, and never thought we'd be on the top floor with our own rooms. We slept in our mom's bed the first night. At around 12 a.m., we were all still awake, and heard children giggling and the sound of marbles rolling on the floor, with little feet running around above our heads. I looked at my mother and said, "Who is that?" To which she replied tiredly, "It must be the upstairs neighbors." I didn't think twice until my sister turned and said, "Mommy, we're the upstairs neighbors." We didn't get much sleep that night. A few months go by with more and more activities. Our family had gotten so aggressive with each other, and my sister, reaching teenagehood, she became ruthless and cruel. She'd scream and slam doors, chase me around the apartment until I had to lock myself in. I once spent 4 hours locked in the laundry room because she wouldn't stop. I spent a lot of time mulling in my room, which just so happened to be the most active part of the house. We think it's because I was so sad and defeated, whatever it was like to feed on that, let alone my sister's anger. My room was different. Its doorway had a corridor, so you couldn't see out unless you walked through it. To combat that, I had an old fat-back television from the 90s. It sat on an angle in the opposite corner of the door, which meant I could see past the corridor and down our hallway through the reflection. Next to that was an antique desk that we got a few years before we moved in at a local antique shop. At bedtime, I'd fall asleep watching Little Bear or Winnie the Pooh. My mother would come in and turn the TV off when she knew I was sleeping. She'd also turn my bedside lamp off, which proved to be a problem. Every night at 3 a.m., my television would turn on by itself. And every night the ringing sound of it booting up would wake me. When this would happen, my closet door, which I kept closed and jammed shut with a hockey stick, would be slid open and the hockey stick would be on the floor or even leaning against the wall. Inside the closet you could make out a big shadow. If it were to stand, I'd guess that it would be almost 7 feet tall, but it was always hunched over, crouched in the corner of my closet. I'd rush to flick my lamp on and it would be gone. I rarely got any sleep at all, and although the shadow seemed malicious and acted as a poltergeist, it felt comforting, as if it was always there when my life was going down the drain. When I did sleep, I'd have loving dreams of a man caring for me and holding me when I felt sad, and I could physically feel the hugs. One time, my mother was off work and kissed my forehead goodbye. She left, and it was just me at the house. When I was half asleep, eyes closed, I felt a pair of arms hug me tight, so tight I couldn't move. I believe my mother came back to hold me again, so I opened my eyes to say goodbye once more, when I realized no one was there, and it was still holding me, broad daylight, eyes open. It finally let go, and I sat up and rushed to the living room and went on with my day. Some days I would fall asleep early when I was too tuckered out after school. One of those days I was woken by my TV like clockwork at 3. I got up to turn it off, so used to the trickery. I wasn't scared, just exhausted. When I saw a little girl in a white nightgown standing in my doorway in the reflection of the television, I assumed it was my sister, and got mad at her for just standing there, and to crawl into my bed if she wanted to sleep with me. To which I got no response. I stormed into my corridor to see no one standing there, and just in time to witness her long black hair running into the bathroom diagonally opposite of my room in the hallway. I rushed to the bathroom and flicked on the light to find myself alone. My mother called out to me and demanded that I stayed in her room, and she said my sister was gone on a sleepover after I had gone to bed. Not long after all this activity, my mother refused to let me sleep in my room. I spent most of my time in there, writing or drawing at the desk next to my window. Most of my friends lived in the same buildings, just as much activity as me, and I had become so depressed I used to watch them playing from my window. A couple of times they told me they witnessed a man standing behind me as I would stare at them. I spent hours at my desk and wrote many stories. One day, I was underneath it grabbing a stack of paper when I looked up to see a carving that read, "Mary Got's a baby." When I came to the realization that this specific desk is from when the residential school was in operation. Not long after this discovery, and later confirmation by my aunt, did we move out, and then, as we were loading up the moving truck, neighbors saw the desk and decided to take it for themselves. We still, to this day, don't know who took it, but I have prayers for them that they don't suffer the way I did, and still currently do. Whatever resided in my closet still to this day is attached to me. Well over a decade, and 2 provinces later, it's still here. Now that I'm trying to be more in tune, maybe I'll figure it out, once and for all. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 263. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do like, subscribe, and comment, and share it with all your friends and family. Alright, before we go on, I think I have a little shout out to give to the author... where was that? I did make a little... there we go. To the author of the final story about the haunted apartment. And that goes to Reddit user Haunted Reality Realm. Thank you very much, Haunted Reality Realm, for allowing us to use your story. Alright, let's see. It's Friday... Yeah, Friday the 14th this goes up. Right, I will do my best to do a stream tomorrow night. No guarantees, because my internet was a bit spotty last week, and it has been a few times when I've tried to stream. So it's just whether or not it depends on whether it's working. And I know it's not my equipment. I've contacted the provider. They say there's a fault they're working on repairing. I don't know if it's been repaired yet, but we'll see. I haven't had any upload issues or anything lately. Everything like that's been fine. So hopefully it's back to normal, and we'll do our best to get a stream going. Okay? And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.